Welcome to Embedded. I am Alicia White, here with Christopher White. Have you ever wanted to hack your car, soup it up to go faster, protect it against manufacturer's security flaws? Have you considered writing your own auto drive system? Craig Smith, author of the Car Hacker's Handbook, is joining us today so we can answer all these questions and more. Before that, the Planet Labs contest winners are Dave and Jonathan. You'll be receiving t-shirts and coasters and a copy of my book, which I believe, Jonathan, you have. This isn't your first contest, is it? Anyway, thank you for playing, and thank you to Planet for giving things away to our listeners.
Oh, hi, Craig. Nice to talk to you today.
Hey, how's it going?
It's been better.
I don't think Chris is going to be talking much given his cold, but that may be the last we hear of him. Who knows? Craig, could you tell us about yourself?
Yeah. Craig Smith. I wrote the Car Hacker's Handbook. I'm also the founder of Open Garages. It's a collaborative organization that involves a bunch of performance tuners, mechanics, security researchers like myself, even artists, kind of get together to just kind of collaborate on vehicle modifications and those kinds of things.
And what do you do with your day job?
The one that pays the bills is a security researcher. So I do a lot of penetration testing. Used to be primarily banking industry, healthcare, those kinds of things. In the last 5 years or so, I've moved more into hardware and automotive technology.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want short answers.
Okay.
We then will try not to ask you for more details and sometimes fail. So let's see how this goes. Hacking, making, engineering, or tinkering?
You want me to pick one of those?
Yes.
I think they're all the same, but I use the term hacking.
Kit or General Lee?
Kit.
What was your first car?
It was a Chevy Cavalier.
What kind of car do you most want now?
Self-driving.
Just self-driving?
I don't have a preferred brand. I'm not even sure I want to buy an off-the-shelf one, but I definitely want to start playing more of self-driving.
Should we bring back the dinosaurs?
Maybe for gas.
When you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Originally, I wanted to be an artist, and then I realized that there's a reason they call them starving artists, so I went into computers.
Yeah. Favorite processor of all time?
All time. I started with the 8088. Still a big fan of assembly, so I don't know. We'll just go with that one.
Cool. Okay, so now what is a day like for you? What is a work day like?
A little chaotic. Since I run my own business, typically involves spending a decent amount of time answering emails, going through my lab. I'll have different things on my workbench at the time. I've also started a game development company at night to, I guess, eat up the remaining free hours I have.
So you founded Open Garage, and what is that?
So it's really just this distributed collaborative group. I found that a lot of performance tuners and whatnot would share things on little forums here and there, but not quite at the volume that, say, security researchers do, and that we're a little more outspoken about things, mainly because we don't have usually a product we're selling or anything that we're too concerned with when it comes to like being sued. And so I saw this lack of communication and collaboration that was happening at a more public scale. And so I created Open Garages as a way for people to set up a community in their area, kind of get together like once a month and collaborate, so mechanics need more help with reverse engineering, or somebody like myself needs to know how certain pieces of a car works and why. It's great to get those different professions together.
So the audience are computer engineer, hackers, and mechanics?
Primarily. Here in Seattle, we also have maybe another group as well. We have a large Burning Man group here. So their modifications typically involve things like adding flamethrowers. So it's a little bit different, but that's the artist side, I guess.
Okay, so flamethrowers aside, interesting as they are, why do people hack their cars?
It varies. I think it starts with customization for most people. A lot of people like to customize the things they own. Cars, people have a lot of affinity towards. Some people name their cars. And then it kind of evolves into sometimes performance related stuff. Maybe you want to race it. Maybe you just want different capabilities that weren't there before. Or if you're like me and a security researcher, you want to know how things work. You want to know, is there any additional risk to it? Is there ways to improve the system?
So, how do people get started?
Well, I mean, it's not too difficult. I assume you can get a hold of a vehicle. The devices, if you were to buy one that's off the shelf, it's usually about $60 for a decent one. You could potentially use like a cheap one. There's these ELM 327. They're very common on eBay for like $12. They'll kind of get you started. I don't recommend them because you hit a wall pretty quickly. I recommend things like the USB to CAN or the CAN Tact. They're good enough devices you can do raw bus communication with. And I wouldn't recommend doing it while you drive, of course, but you could plug it into a vehicle that's on and get started with that with, no real risk really to the vehicle or yourself. If you want to go further and actually test things that maybe you eventually want to like do simulations on the road, I recommend building a test bench, which is basically just the components from a junkyard put together. Typically the components you want to do an assessment on, and then you just connect to that and do testing on a bench environment instead of an actual moving vehicle.
Okay, so there's so many questions now that I have from all of that. You said devices, and I think this is an OBD dongle. This is the thing that the mechanic usually plugs in, and it sniffs the CAN bus and can pop up the diagnostics that my dealer might give me to say, I don't know, I have a flamethrower installed, or something along those lines. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the typical way of plugging in. So you have this generic OBD connector, and that was primarily invented for EPA and emissions testing. And so there's a couple wires that are standardized, one being CAN bus. Those are always in the same spot. You get 12 volts out of it. That's always there. And your ground's always there. There's other wires to it, and different manufacturers can use them for different things. They're almost always different bus networks in the vehicle. So as you progress in your learning, you'll start out with a basic dongle most likely, and you'll just plug into this OBD connector to talk on the high-speed CAN bus. But you may want to get to other signals that are on different buses, and that's kind of where your learning will go. After that, you can even use T-tap connectors or any kind of wire splicing to go directly into a bus if you want to bypass the OBD altogether.
Okay, so one of the buses that might be interesting is the CAN bus, which I mentioned. Could you explain for people who don't know what it is? Sure.
So the CAN bus is a pretty popular bus network. It's probably the easiest to get started with. And it's just a two-wire system, uses differential signaling. I don't know how technically you want to get with that, but it's not really that complicated. It usually goes about 500 kilobits, I think. It's your 500K baud kind of communication speeds. It's a very simple packet. It has 8 bytes for its data and an ID. So it doesn't have like a source or destination or anything. So if you're not very familiar with networking, or if you are really familiar with it, it's going to be a very easy one to get started with. And I think that also because it's standardized on the OBD connector, all of your sniffers you may want to buy will at very least talk to that one. And so it's a great one to kind of get started with. I think that's why you see the most attention to CAN bus as opposed to the other buses.
It's RS-232 like, except that it's got the addresses, and so there can be multiple nodes, and it's a different voltage. I think it's a higher voltage.
Well, the CAN bus is kind of idles at 2.5 volts, and the CAN high goes up a volt, and CAN low goes down a volt.
Okay, so it's differential. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's sort of CAN bus. And the reason it's interesting in cars is because it's got all of those addresses. And so you can have your infotainment system, you can have your right rear blinker light if it's intelligent enough, and you can have your, what else? What else would you have on a CAN bus?
They pretty much put everything on the buses now. Now, they're not always on CAN bus, and then it just kind of varies. The main goal of that is really to reduce your wiring. So if you have every component talking to every other component, it's just a lot of wires, which is more cost and more weight. And so, by putting a bus line that goes throughout your car and everybody can just kind of tap into that, it just cuts down a lot of those things. So you're going to have some type of bus no matter what. And I think as CANs become cheaper and a little more common, we're seeing a lot more things just thrown on the CAN bus. So you can really find just about anything on there. There's definitely, like you mentioned, the infotainment units, your nav systems, your ECU, but it'll have the whole powertrain will also sometimes be on CAN bus. You can have very generic things such as your windshield wipers and headlights can also be on CAN bus. It can really just be anywhere. It's kind of up to the manufacturer what they put onto it. There's no standard as to what they have to put on CAN bus and what it needs to do, other than basic diagnostics.
And so with everything passing by on this bus, it isn't really very secure either, is it?
No, there really isn't any kind of, from a bus perspective, any kind of thought of being in a non-protected environment. CAN bus is used a lot in manufacturing for robots as well. So it's just this kind of quick communication. It's very reliable from dealing with static and that kind of stuff with the differential signaling, but it has no other concept of security, like say spoofing. There's no source and destination. You just have an ID. And that ID is kind of like a category ID. So if you have number 123, that could represent, all things related to like the door locks. But it's up to the engineer to just kind of pick those things. There's no way to say who put that on the bus. I mean, was it the door lock? Was it somebody else? Your dongle? There's no way to determine where that came from.
So the dongle can not only read everybody else's messages, it can generate messages to give instructions.
Yes. And any compromised device on the bus would be able to do the same. So if somebody were to compromise, say, the telematics unit or the IVI nav system, they could also read and transmit on the bus.
Well, I think in your book you mentioned that the infotainment system is often Bluetooth hackable, and so you can get to the bus from outside the car. Is that right?
Yeah, the infotainment center has they have the most kind of like attack surface is what we like to call it. So the more input you have into something, your greater attack surface. And so the infotainment or the IVI system, same thing, just abbreviated, tends to have a lot of features, and a lot of them tend to be wireless. So they'll oftentimes have cellular in it. The telematics will be built into it. They'll have Bluetooth. They'll have things like sometimes their own access point. You have digital radio goes
and
into
USB.
it. So these are all. USB is more of a physical than wireless, but that's another input. Same with CDs, like the map update CDs. My first hack on an IVI, I used the map update CD. That was how I got code execution on it.
Okay, so you're saying that from outside a car, using BLE or Wi-Fi or any of a number of things, you can turn my engine off? I mean, I've seen this in TV shows and movies, but is it that easy?
Well, I mean, it requires research. And so what happens, say, if you want to go through Bluetooth, what you're really looking for isn't just to connect on Bluetooth. You're looking for basically the manufacturer to have an old Bluetooth stack, which isn't all that uncommon. That radio was made at some point in time. It probably doesn't have any kind of update mechanism in it half the time. And a lot of times the Bluetooth drivers that came with the OS aren't restricted. So you have a lot of different ones that maybe the engineers didn't realize you would even try, not even looking through the list of drivers that could be there. So you can find all these older drivers for some arcane system. And then if you have a vulnerability for it, which would be just a standard one you'd find through Metasploit, you would then get code execution. So if that radio is then attached to a bus, which oftentimes they are, you could, then start controlling the vehicle.
It keeps stopping at code execution. Why? I mean, okay, so yes, once I can run my code on my IVF, my infotainment unit, I suppose I get a lot more control of everything. But what do you do after that?
Well, it's up to you. Because that's why I typically call that the end game. Like when you're running your own code on a vehicle, an attacker's code, you have a lot of control. So if you wanted to spoof different devices on a vehicle, you could. I mean, you kind of have to be like a sociopath or something if you want to actually try and kill somebody. But I guess there is groups of people who'd want to do that, I suppose. But I'd say most attackers would be going for some of the data harvesting and stuff that happens with an IVI system. So, it's collecting your GPS. You can turn the mic on in the car. If they've connected and upload their contacts, you have all that information. Those kinds of things tend to be more valuable than causing damage. But I guess it just depends on the motive of the attacker themselves. But when you have code execution, it's kind of up to you what you want to do at that stage. That's why I typically that's kind of the end game part of the conversation. Once something's running on there, it's kind of done.
From what you're saying and some from your book, there's a lot of adversarial language, attack surfaces, breaking the vehicle, weaponizing CAN findings. Is this a byproduct of security language or representation of how car hacking exists in the world today?
No, that's very much just the way I speak. I come from a security background, and a lot of the focus of the book was kind of teaching how to, either secure your automotive device or to assess your automotive device. So I walked through that process using security terminology. Car hacking, though, isn't traditionally that way. You're not usually weaponizing findings. You may find vulnerabilities and backdoors, and it's typically to change the performance or something of your ECU. Now, as security gets more, let's just say, better implemented into ECU, say we start using actual cryptography, we're going to get closer to how you have to root jail or jailbreak a cell phone. You'll have to do that with your car. And so if they don't offer normal tinkering methods, then all the performance tuners, all the third-party people making stuff are going to have to look at the jailbreaking route. And so you're going to start seeing that used more in a normal mechanic performance tuner space than you see now. But right now, that terminology is pretty much so just security people.
So you're talking about jailbreaking, hacking, voiding your warranty versus tinkering that is okay with the manufacturer of the car. Are these really separate? Are there any manufacturers that allow you to play?
So this gets really, really kind of gray area. So the way the ECU and stuff works, you have a lot of parameters and stuff that you can change. And as long as you're not violating EPA standards, you're not really breaking the law. Now, you may be violating a warranty. It just depends. And then what part of the warranty also depends. Is it the entire engine? Is it just that component? But if you change, in my opinion, if you change the entire firmware, you pretty much avoided the warranty. And I think that's fair. Now, is it allowed? You are. It's required. Like if you are a dealer and you have to make changes to a car, you have to modify the firmware. So for right to repair, you have to do it. Also, most manufacturers sell even non-street legal components for their vehicle, for privatized racing. You're just not supposed to use them on the street. So, it's not that they don't want you to tinker. It's just they don't want to be liable for your tinkering.
Well, that seems fair. If you change your oxygen fuel mixture to the point where your car blows up, that's sort of on you.
I fully agree.
But we're such a litigious society. And I can see how the car manufacturers would just want to close it down.
Yeah, and I think that's because we're so litigious, especially with auto manufacturers, is kind of why we get so much pushback in an area that normally we wouldn't. One example that really surprised me is when we first started pointing out that, security-related vulnerabilities applied to vehicles. One of the things we pointed out was, hey, we really need a method for independent researchers to communicate with the dealer, not the dealer, but the manufacturer on the findings. Can you put an email address? like, hey, all security related stuff, please send it here, because I can't call customer support and say I found this Bluetooth exploit. That they're not going to get. It's not going to go anywhere.
No.
So we're like, hey, just put something that goes to your security team, and legal will shut that down. And they shut it down because they're afraid if you were to tell them something that maybe they can't fix or choose not to fix or whatever, now they know about the problem. And if it's better for them, it's just not to know about the problem, which is crazy thinking from a normal security perspective. It like blew my mind that was the typical response when you ask for just an email address that will let you know there's a problem with your product. They're very much a cease and desist kind of group. Although they've gotten better in the last, say, year and a half. I've seen major improvements. But when I first started this like 3 to 4 years ago, you couldn't get anywhere. It was really difficult.
What do you think caused the improvements?
A lot of it's knowledge, kind of beating the drum, making things more exposed. It started out kind of small, people giving talks on things. And I think there was, a lot of these groups had security not companies, but security departments that, were paying attention. They're seeing these security conferences and people talking about, hey, we think there's this bigger problem with vehicles. But they didn't really have a whole lot of voice inside the company. I would say, to a large degree, whether agree with them or not, when you have like Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek publicly owning a car on a public road, that caused a lot of controversy and discussion. And you had board members cutting through the airport and seeing their car up on the news. And that kind of changed a lot of discussion. So then the security teams finally got some voice. They got some funding to kind of try and fix things. And so it's a good thing. It's just taken a bit because they're from a traditional, arena. So originally they're like mechanical engineers. That's how the auto manufacturers were. And then they kind of went to electrical engineers, all discrete logic chips and whatnot. But as we get, more firmware and more OS-based stuff, even AI systems in vehicles, these companies are transitioning to software companies. And I think a lot of them just haven't realized they're already a software company. And so they have to kind of evolve another time.
Yes, but they are from the background of... Well, they're from the background of cars can hurt people, and not just the people who are repairing them, and not just the people who are driving them, but they can hurt more people. And so they have to have a very safety frame of mind. And there are car, standards for software to make sure that you don't do things like what Toyota did with the braking and that. The goal is to make it really safe, but then when you hack it, you're not only endangering your car, which you bought that, fine, I have no problem with that, but also the drivability on a public roadway. How do you balance those?
Well, I think you've always been able to tinker and modify a vehicle and drive it on a public roadway. Hacking in another vehicle is definitely a bad thing, like a malicious hacker. If you don't have access to it, you shouldn't be doing that for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with making modifications. I think that's actually what causes innovation. You need to be able to do that. If you don't do that and you say only the manufacturers can make modifications, that's going to set a really bad precedent, and that you're basically saying that, okay, because we have lots of money in a big company, we can make something. Whatever we give you, you're just going to like it. And that's it. You can't make any modifications to it. You can't make any improvements on it. If you think you can build your own better self-driving system, too bad. You're not GM. You're not Bosch. You're not these larger companies. And that's going to really hurt the industry.
I agree. I mean, tinkering is an important thing to do. And yet I am a little squeamish about cars because I just can imagine all the things that can go wrong, but I can usually do that whether it's cars or not. How do we convince the manufacturers? Is there a group that lobbies to let them know that their whole attitude of we don't even want to know about security is stupid?
There are some groups, there's some like I Am the Cavalry, which is an outreach group. They're not lobbyists, but they make a very a decent effort to have a kind of an outreach between security researchers and traditional companies. And this isn't just automotive; they do medical devices and stuff like that as well. And it's to kind of bridge this gap, so we don't go back through the same process. I mean, as you're now realizing you're a software company, we don't want you to have to relearn everything that software companies have learned in the last 10 to 15 years. Don't just say, okay, we'll put a firewall in and then everything will be secure. We thought that 10, 15 years ago on the internet, it didn't do anything. So we're trying to give you the lessons learned. And also, I Am a Calvary group, works with security researchers to kind of let them know, like, hey, this isn't Facebook, this isn't Google. You can't shame them into fixing it by Friday. It just doesn't work that way. So you have to go about it a different way. And so it's a nice little glue aspect of things. There's a couple lobbying alliances, but they're more like, I think there's a repair alliance and there's a farmer alliance, and they do some lobbying. And they fall into the tinkering and modification piece. But there's not nearly as many or as large as the automotive lobbyists. So there's always that kind of uphill battle.
So getting away from the politics and back to the technology, I had some questions about, like, how do I really do this? It starts with CAN, for me probably, or maybe Bluetooth if I think I can get to there. If I walk up to a modern car in a parking lot and give the taillight a whack, does that mean I expose the CAN body control bus? Can I hook up my, I don't know, Discovery board that has CAN on it and just pop the locks and take the car? Except for the illegality of the last part.
Yeah, illegality aside. That is definitely a thing that can be done. It requires, of course, that the CAN bus be running by the taillight, and which signal to send to unlock the car door, and assuming that also the door locks are on that same bus. But if all those things apply, yes, that works, and that has been known to happen before. You could use the STM32 Discovery board. That works fine. You'll have to add a transceiver to it, but that's like a couple bucks. But no, that would work. I wouldn't start there, but it is definitely a proof of concept of a goal you could go for. I would start with a basic CAN sniffer, like a $60 one, plugged into the OBD port under your steering column, and first just learn, what CAN packets look like, how to identify your target ones. So like maybe you're looking for door locks, so how do you look at the stream of data and then find out which ID in the string, which byte is actually controlling that lock? So that's the first thing you should be working on. And once you kind of get that down, in the book, we kind of call it the payload. You haven't really hacked anything yet. You're just understanding how the car works. And so that payload could be played over a tail light or whatever, and then also the doors will unlock for that car. But that's where I would start.
So we do have some listeners who work on these things and work on other CAN bus systems. Given that it's broadcast and you just need to attach to listen and inject packets, can you suggest some security practices for things that are important not to change, that are still compatible with the protocol?
So, of course, don't be changing a whole lot of things while you're driving, unless you really know what you're doing. But for the most part, if you're in a stop state and you're even fuzzing on the bus, you're probably going to be fine. You'll cause what's called the Christmas tree effect on the dashboard, on the instrument cluster, which is a bunch of lights blinking. Turning off the car and turning it back on will usually reset all that stuff. For a modern car, it's not too dangerous to just play around with it. I'm sorry. I think I lost track of the actual question.
No, actually, that's a better direction. I'll come back to that question.
Okay.
So you are saying that I really should do this on my own car, that I should not be starting out by going to a parking lot and playing with other people's cars, right?
Yeah, you should never be using somebody else's car, at least not without their permission. If you have the permission, yeah, sure, go at it. But in general, I would do all my research on my own car or when I pull it out of a junkyard. I'm a big component of going to pick and pull, spending about $100 to grab all the components you need, and wiring up basically a plywood board with an ECU, maybe an instrument cluster, and just some wires. You can do that for very cheap amounts. It can sit on your desk. and you can get the same result at the end of it. And if you want to, once you're done with your research, you could use that on, again, your version of a car, one you're legally allowed having access to test it all out.
I like this idea of putting it on my desk to try it out. And you say for like $100, I can get a whole system. An ECU, the car locks, the windshield wiper controller, what would I look for in that system?
Yeah, so it's really like you want to break it down to what you're most interested in. So a lot of times when I'm building these test benches, like I care about the instrument cluster and the ECU. Sometimes in order to get the instrument cluster to work, I have to grab a couple other modules. The one I typically use is it's a 2006 Malibu, and that one also required the body control module, which is where the fuses are, and the ignition immobilizer system. So it's right where the key goes. So that's a little harder to gather, just because a lot of times in junkyards you don't have a key. But the reason being is because the instrument cluster in that case wouldn't start up unless the handshake went between the key and the ECU, stuff that normally is there to prevent you from hot wiring. But still, that entire system costs about $100 in parts. Most of those things aren't bought by normal people at a junkyard. They'll buy ECUs, but nobody's really usually buying instrument clusters and stuff. So a lot of times you bring this up to the desk and they don't have a price for it. They just whatever. And those are nice. And I use those because I want to send signals to the test bench so I can move the dials and then see what the CAN traffic looks like. And then those are great for training people because you get this immediate feedback. If you want to do door locks, then you would get an ECU and you would grab the controller for the door lock and plug that in. So it's really just whatever you want to target. You usually aren't targeting a whole car. You usually have something in mind. And so just get those parts.
And so if I wanted to race my car, I would need the ECU, the engine control unit, to, I don't know, add knocks or Chris is just looking at me like, what, really? We're not souping up our car. But if I wanted to do racing on track day, of course, not drag racing in the city, that would be bad. Is the ECU mostly what I'd need, or is there something else?
Maybe for that type of research. So it depends. When you're doing performance tuning, there's a little more information on it. So depending what mods you want to make, you might just be able to purchase the pass-through cable and software to do those changes. Now, if the research you want to do was, so in order to actually change firmware, there is a security access token. It's usually a 2 or 4 byte like a random number. And then the goal is you say, hey, I want access to
2 or 4 bytes. That's not enough.
Yeah, it's not very big at all. And so what happens is you'll say, hey, I want access to the firmware. It gives you like 2 to 4 bytes. The advanced systems are 4. And then your goal is to send the appropriate answer back. Let's see, they're 2 or 4 bytes. And if you do that, it unlocks the firmware and you can make your modifications. And so one thing you may want to do is you may get an ECU so you can figure out what that code system is. So if you didn't want to pay for it, for somebody else who has a product that does that code handshake for you, you could get the ECU to try different methods to get that security token exchange.
That's
and you're kind of on. Yeah, you're on a questionable area there if you start doing that, depending what you do with the result of information. But with the DMCA and the most recent exemptions, ECU firmware modifications and tinkering are permitted. So you should be okay. Knock on wood.
You should be okay.
Should be. You're probably fine.
If I wanted to, I don't know, if I wanted to do auto drive, that seems like a bigger thing because I have to involve all these different sensors and probably add some more to my system. Is that?
Yeah, that one's huge.
Okay, so it is huge. One. And not just the software.
Did it, but he's remarkable. So, yeah, there is one person who did it on his own that I'm aware of. But normally I would say that's a team of people, and it hits an area that we just haven't dealt with. Where we, I totally think, if you think you can do it on your own, in his case, he did do it on his own. You should be able to, but testing on public roads is still an issue. So, you need to be able to test it prior to that, maybe get to a certain level of certification before you can start bringing it onto public roads. And as of right now, we don't have anything like that. We have no kind of test to say like, okay, you're safe enough that you can start testing in like a suburb. Okay, now you're at class 2 and you can test on highway or whatever it happens to be. That's just totally Wild West right now.
It's like we need car simulator games for our auto drive programs.
Yeah, I believe that's actually what Google uses or has used, and with the other stuff as well. I believe they run through simulations.
Oh, of course, they have offline sandboxes. It's so much easier to test your algorithms, and they've got plenty of data.
Right, and so I think we can still allow that type of tinkering or modifications. It's just we need to have a way to do it safely, some kind of certification type process, and right now we don't have that.
Well, I hear the FAA is really into certifying every damn thing. But that's a separate rant.
If you add propellers to it, then I think you have to certify with FAA.
Exactly. Or at least, well, anyway. You mentioned that one of your first hacks was updating firmware with a map CD. Updating firmware, A, seems a little dangerous because it's hard to go back, but B, I've heard people say that that car manufacturers shouldn't allow firmware updates. And I think that's crazy, but I wondered what you thought.
If it wasn't required to make changes, then I would say that's fine to restrict it. But unfortunately, it is required. I mean, if you change anything really major in your vehicle, you have to update the firmware. And it's not always just parameter-based stuff. Even if you want to do like a tinkering kind of thing, like say valet mode, you want to make it so, you hit the brake 3 times before while your car's in park and goes in valet mode, that prevents the car from going over 35. Something like that. That is a software type thing you can do. You can make modifications to your firmware to do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing something like that. I do think you void your warranty. I think that's okay to do something of that nature for the manufacturer, but I don't think they should restrict that from happening. I don't think that you can't really make modifications and tell people they can't change firmware. I mean, that's where the code's at that handles the modification.
It's funny that this is a new problem. I mean, our cars didn't used to be entirely software controlled. It didn't have this, should I update the firmware, when we didn't ever talk about firmware, or it was all just masked ROMs and you didn't ever get to change it. And yet in the last 15 years, it has become that every car has a firmware update mechanism, and some of them are more annoying than others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it used to be the network too. The wires, they were just resistance on a wire, certain voltages going up and down, and now it's a bus system. And so before, if you want to make a modification, you just simply send the same kind of signal and you were fine. Now you have to understand what signals are being sent across the bus in order just to communicate with your vehicle. And unfortunately, one of the things I'd like to see the auto manufacturers do is to publish at least a large amount of that information, what signal works for that vehicle. I want to see an owner's manual like we used to have back in the day that actually told you all the parts and the wires. I don't want to have to subscribe to a wiring diagram. And even having a wiring diagram but not knowing what's on the wire doesn't really help me much. I need to know, like, hey, I'm making a piece that integrates with the radio unit. What signals do I need to send? Or I'm replacing the radio unit. What signals do I want to receive? Right now, they consider that secret sauce, and that's ridiculous. One, they're only 8 bytes and it's easy to reverse engineer. But 2, you need it to make modifications. You need it to add third-party components and have them work the same. So I'm hoping we'll get there. I'm not too sure how to get that conversation in the right people to make that change, but I'm really have my fingers crossed that we'll get to the point where it's a lot easier to make modifications without this whole reverse engineering piece.
So if I buy a third-party radio for my car, they've had to reverse engineer the manufacturer's system?
Yeah, that's why a lot of times if you get even like the name brand ones like Pioneer and stuff, they don't have the same functionality as your normal in-car radio that you bought with it. So like maybe your radio had a thing where if you sped up, the radio got louder. Most of the times they don't have that. A lot of times you have to buy a separate little translation piece if you want to have your steering wheel buttons control the radio. They just don't have all the different methods for all the different cars to do all these things. And it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that big of a deal.
That's annoying. I mean, it's
extremely annoying.
This isn't damaging my car. This isn't anything that can void my warranty. This is, I want my radio to work when I get one that's slightly different.
Yes. Yeah, it's a lockout situation right now. So you have to be in their little group of who they've approved to work with the vehicle, and that inhibits innovation, and it sucks. Because I had a radio break, and I think it was $1,300 for the replacement from the factory on 2008 vehicle. Or you can go and get a much nicer looking one, for $400, but you're going to lose all those integration features. And that's ridiculous. I shouldn't have to pay 3 times the amount to have some, steering wheel controls, basic stuff added to the vehicle. And it's a large part because of that. That stuff's considered secret sauce. And there's ways of getting on a list to buy that information that are legal. A lot of people, because again, you need it to do repairs and you need it to make modifications. There is a huge gray market area where ex-employees and engineers are willing to let go of this. It's usually just a single text file that has this information in it for $1,000 or $2,000. So a lot of people acquire them. They're well traded, but they're not legally traded, and it shouldn't even be something you have to go to the gray markets for because it's such a required piece.
No, yes, this is ridiculous. Especially if it's something that a skilled engineer could essentially reverse engineer in 2 days, given a car.
Yeah, we even say that's where you should start. We just said that. Like when you're starting reverse engineer, they're easy. But it's silly to have to do that.
It is. And there's this drive to make cars less open all the time. And it's got to be annoying, especially for you if you want to do these things.
Yeah, and that's part of my fear of, being a security person, when we're saying like, hey, it's very, very easy to make modifications to firmware, and I don't want a piece of malware making modifications to my ECU. It's fine if I do, but I don't want somebody else to do it. So that security access token being 2 bytes or 4 bytes has got to go. And the way to do that is typically with public key infrastructure. So you have a signed and, updates, that are encrypted that, the ECU has a secure boot area. It can check the key and say, okay, yeah, no, this certificate is from my manufacturer. I'm going to upload it now. And that's great. And that's a much better system for taking firmware updates. But unfortunately, if you stop there, you've locked out my ability to modify my car and tinkering. So, like one of the things I've been trying to promote is like, hey, there needs to be a physical switch on the ECU. Or whatever device we're talking about, so that I can, maybe set a jumper or do some kind of like, I had to make this extra effort to get to this piece. I mean, ECUs take at least 15 minutes to get to. So, it's not like I can just pop out a taillight and upload my firmware. But if I get to that piece and I can set a jumper, it should give me an override that voids my warranty, but, lets me upload my own piece of firmware. And once it's been uploaded, that device is tainted. It can't go back to a non-voided piece. It's very similar to how Google Chromebooks and stuff work. The Android phones, it's pretty easy to root them. There's actually a physical switch on a Chromebook, at least the original version. And when you flipped it, it voided your warranty, but you can put any OS you want on it. Like I want that in a vehicle. I don't want them to see this as a golden walled garden that we can now move to. We can fix security and lock out anybody that's not on our special list. And I can see that being extremely tempting. And so I'm really trying to kind of beat the drum like, hey, yeah, we can totally add encryption, but we have to be very cognizant of how we do it. We need to take the extra effort to have a type of physical backdoor, not like the FBI Apple backdoors, but one where you're like, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm intentionally voiding because I need to. You need a way of doing that.
Do you worry that exposing how to do these things through your book and through Open Garages, do you worry that it's going to cause problems, that black hats will come and cause trouble for the rest of us?
No, I mean, I've been in security for over 20 years, and one thing I've learned is exposure is what fixes things. It's like a magician. If you talk about how a trick works, it gets rid of the illusion and people can work on the fix. If you don't do that, I mean, black hats are going to look at it regardless if there's a book on it or not. If there's value to it, that's what they're going to do. And if they don't tell anybody what it is, you don't even know how to fix your problem or even what your current security state is. Like, is the minivan you're driving around, is that vulnerable? If nobody's talking about these things, that's a worse position to be in than to say, like, well, here's how you assess it. And you may find some problems, and there very well may be a lot of pressure to get that fixed, but that's the better route to go.
Do you hack your own cars?
Yeah, it's the only ones I hack. So those are the ones I've been hired to hack. Nice try, though. I see what you try to do there.
Do you hack them to make them more secure from outside intrusion?
So unfortunately, that's a little difficult because the only real way to do that, if you're working with a company that actually has a disclosure policy and a way of communicating findings, then there's a good chance you'll get an update and it'll be fine. But if you're working on an older vehicle or through a manufacturer who maybe doesn't yet have any kind of way of reporting vulnerabilities, your best bet is to replace the part. And so it's good that you know about it, but it's not as easy to reconfigure as, say, a computer system or a network. If the bus architecture is wrong and you have everything attached to the bus, you have your whole powertrain unit attached to your telematics, and there's a bug in your telematics, and that's extremely dangerous. But you can't just pop in a firewall between the two. It's difficult to do. I mean, being an engineer, I could build one. It's not that hard, but it'd be easier just to take the telematics unit out to replace it.
Well, yes, except that one may not be the manufacturer's one, and it may not do all the things you want to do. And if the manufacturer, I was thinking a firewall would not be that hard, but
no, it's not too bad.
That's not a fun way to spend your time. I mean, sure, okay.
No. And you have to put them in sometimes weird locations and kind of, make sure they're, protected from the environment and that kind of stuff. So you can't just take a couple embed devices and, you can technically, from an academic perspective, build one that way, but you really need to make it more ruggedized if you're going to drive around with it. And so that's extra work and whatnot for, I don't know. I'll usually go with less features if I have to, but it's not the way I want it to be. I want to be able to just report like, hey, I found this issue. I know you can't change the architecture of the bus, but can we update the firmware? That kind of stuff.
So actual manufacturers, what if I wanted to get into doing car hacking and I wanted to go to a junk shop, the pick and place, which I found out we have one recently. So I'm sort of tempted. What kind of car should I look for if I'm taking parts out?
So newer ones are better because they'll have more features. You're more likely to have more CAN bus stuff. If you can get a 2008 or above, that's great. It's nice if you can find one with keys in it, just because if you took the key in the ECU and you decide later you're missing a piece, like that's what happened with me. In order to get the instrument cluster to work, I realized, I can't just fake it. I need to also get this other piece or the ECU won't finish booting. So I had to go back and get the body control module and the ignition switch. But I did pick a car that already had keys in it, so it wasn't too hard to go back and get those pieces. But yeah, anything 2008 or above should be fine. Again, it depends what you're looking for. If you're just looking at ECUs, and those are fine.
No particular
I would typically go
to stay or to stay away from or to head towards.
It kind of depends what you're going after. So if you're going after like an IVI system, the infotainment, you might want to go with one that has a really nice one. In those cases, grant's going to cost you more money. So it depends who you are. But if you work for a business and you want to do, say, significant vulnerability research, what you should do is you should pick something with a large attack surface like an IVI and just buy a factory one. So, if you see that, I really like, I don't know, let's just pick a random vehicle. Let's say the newest Honda Civic, right? They have a pretty nice nav system in the new one. So you're going to probably drop about $1,500. But to get one brand new, you can have it sent to you and then just attack that. You don't even need the rest of the car. You can take it apart. You can go through the firmware, look for JTAG ports, all that good stuff. And look for outdated software, such like the Bluetooth things and stuff we found. And that's how you'll go about being a security researcher and finding vulnerabilities. If it's plugged into a bus, what the end result is. So you don't really have to do a full proof of concept unless you're asked to. As long as you get code execution on it, most engineers, at least in the security department, knows what that means. Again, it's great if they have a way of disclosing that. It gets tricky when you don't. But if anybody listening finds a vulnerability and is afraid of communicating that with the auto manufacturer because maybe they don't have a public policy on it, contact I Am the Cavalry and or CERT. Those two places can kind of get that information to you and kind of protect you at the same time.
CERT is CERT, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I Am the Cavalry will be in the show notes, of course.
Sometimes, worst case scenario, we can even use some of our legal people because then you have a confidentiality between legal and them. So if the lawyer reports the bug, then they can't actually get to you. So we can provide that extra kind of safety barrier.
Which shouldn't be necessary. Sigh.
I agree.
So are there
sigh,
any
a big
cars
sigh.
that are less hackable that you probably don't want to play with because it just is a headache?
Well, the ones I wouldn't start with would be more like semi trucks, like the class 5 vehicles and above. Simply because they're not as resistant to like fuzzing. If you're sending invalid packets to those systems, you can permanently damage components in the vehicle. Not that a lot of people have semi-trucks sitting around, but just something to be aware of. There are certain types of vehicles that aren't as resilient, and you can really cause some permanent damage with them, where it's not as likely with a car.
Also, the semi-truck up on blocks in your driveway is going to piss off your significant other.
Yes, when that gets bricked and it's just sitting there, that's going to end badly. I think your days of car hacking are done.
In your book, it is all formatted and it talks about security and penetration testing, and cars are the example platform. While it's called the Car Hacker's Handbook, it seems like it is more introduction to penetration testing and security with cars as the example. Was that intentional?
Yeah, and I think it's something you just realize when you start, get past the mystery of a vehicle. Like if you come from a software world, you're like, well, I don't know anything about cars. Once you kind of get past like, well, it's not that hard, and you learn what you're missing, then you can start applying it to anything else. And I think cars are just, Internet of Things. It's just a computer on wheels, just like a bunch of other things are. And that is intentional. I do want you to make that connection. I just think that cars are very accessible. Not everybody has a baby monitor, I guess, to hack, or a industrial control center to go after. But most people can get at least to a junkyard to get car parts. And most people understand cars, and you get the real risk of it. It's not like some kind of doorbell thing you're hacking, or a light bulb, like, oh, that was kind of fun, but you don't really see the implications. But the methodology is the exact same. And so that technique works on cars. It works on airlines. It works on anything. So yeah, there's just a generic kind of, this is how you do hardware/software penetration testing. Just cars are just an acceptable kind of form to do that on.
And it's a fascinating form because you can do things that you've always wanted to. My mom made a modification to her car many years ago, off-the-shelf modification, where it talked when it backed up. It was so embarrassing, I had to hide under the dashboard whenever I was in the car. But she really enjoyed it, saying, this car is backing up over and over again. I can see how other people would want other things. Cars are oddly a representation of ourselves.
Absolutely. We have a rich history of modifying vehicles. We always have. Those are the original car hackers. This term is just kind of to add on the extra connected piece of it, but it's very much so just enabling capability. And I think everybody feels that they spend so much time in cars, at least a lot of times, that you get this connection with your vehicle. And if you've modified a vehicle before, it's way more intense of a connection.
Yes, it becomes your car and not just the car.
Absolutely. Yes.
One of the things that I found interesting in your book was around well, I don't know, page 49 in my copy, which were 3 pages of numbers that looked sort of like those Soviet number stations that just went on, and it's keypad entry. And if I enter these numbers into a keypad car, it will unlock the car in 20 minutes. At least that's what you wrote. That can't possibly be true. Yeah.
So this is somebody else's finding. I have a link there. I don't actually have his real name. That's in the book for it. And it was in a forum posting. And I want to capture in the book, one, because I was afraid the forum posting would eventually go away. But also because that's really the way you'd have to do it. You'd have to print out these codes. And the bug is for those keypads on the side of a door. And the bug that they're discussing here is if you punch in, let's just say it's 5 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, obviously it checks to see if that's the password. Now, what should happen at that stage, it should clear the buffer, and then you have to put in another 5 digits. But what actually happened is that if you punch in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it got checked. And then when you press 6, it checked again. Except this time it checked 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you didn't have to put in a whole another 5 digits to get a whole different check. And so that number pattern is a way to not overlap a bunch of tests. So it reduces your key space you have to put in significantly. So if you were to sit there with your finger on the book and a finger on a keypad, you could run through that. Some of this has been fixed in some of the more modern cars. I don't remember exactly which one that worked on, but there's a couple years where that worked, and you can sit there and it take you about 20 minutes, worst case scenario, to get through it. But if you hit a code earlier, it unlocks earlier. So it does work. It's interesting. I really enjoyed that hack. That was a very clever hack, and so I want to capture that in the book.
How important is it to look up what other people are doing?
Oh, it's very important. I try and give researchers credit whenever I can when I use something. There's actually so much research now that it's hard to even know what everybody's doing. I find new things all the time that's like, oh, wow, I wish I would have known that when I wrote the book, because that would have been really cool to capture, or it would have saved me a bunch of time. This book was pretty much so, at least the security aspect of it was me being excited about my research and trying to share that with other people. And, things that I've learned when I was, going through this process. But, right now we've been discussing having certain conferences that just showcase like the tools and stuff that people are using, and try and collaborate more on those and get that, even more than Open Garages is, but actually have a full blown showcase just to try and get all the people on the same page and see what people's current hurdles are.
Black Hat Autotopia.
Yeah.
How do I find good non-malicious modifications to build on if I'm searching online? Where do I go?
What are you asking for? Like you want to use like a patch or something, or what are you looking for?
Like the ECUs, we've been sort of saying that like they are a thing, but you need a lot of information about the ECU from, the manufacturer, except they don't always give it out. And so where do I go to get that information? And then if somebody else has done what I want to do, how do I know that their update doesn't include other things?
Yeah, that part unfortunately is a little bit difficult. Performance tuning forums are the best place for those kind of like off-the-shelf firmware mods, like Valet Mode. There are several software packages that have that capability that you can push down. Now, those usually are not open source tools. That those groups usually they don't come from the open source background. They're starting to. You're starting to see a lot more of it, but back then they don't. A lot of small shops making small little tools here and there that do different features, and finding them is, it can be a challenge. You can try using Open Garages and posting on their mailing list and see if somebody's done something that can point you in the right direction. But I don't know that's all that much better than just posting to a random forum the same question. There isn't currently a very centralized way of just saying like, hey, I have this car. What kind of modifications can I make? And a list of all these different places and things you can get to do that.
I wish
maybe we'll build one of those.
Yeah, I wish the manufacturers had a forum that was mods that maybe they didn't agree with. Maybe they voided your warranty anyway, but at least there was a place to talk to other enthusiasts.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, it's just decentralized right now. There's a couple forums for different types of cars that are more popular than others. But yeah, it's about as close as you're going to get. And there's no like app store for mods yet.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
That actually would be a lot of fun. I think somebody should build one of those. That would be really cool.
Okay, so I think we are about out of time, so I'm going to do my last few questions. Your book, Car Hacker's Handbook, was published by No Starch recently, last month.
Yeah, I believe it finally came out.
And there is a free version available, although it's a little older and quite a bit shorter. Is that right? Yes, that was the very first book I wrote, and that was self-published, and it was really just to go along with some classes I was teaching at Virginia Tech. It was just like a free course book for them, and it turns out it was really, really popular, even though it's this short little book. And I kind of got the attention of No Starch, and so we've gone that route. You can still get the free 2014 version, and eventually No Starch will release this one free. I don't know exactly how long that'll take, but this will also be under Creative Commons eventually. Well, yeah, but they're going to keep it until it's not making money for them. O'Reilly told me my book would be open source at some point, but since they're still sending me checks, I assume that isn't going to happen this month.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear. Like when we negotiated that, I guess I should have put a timeline on there. That's lessons learned for me.
Well, they're reasonable people. You might be able to talk them into a 2-year. I don't know. And people still buy the book even if it's free. So it'll work out.
Yeah. I mean, I was selling the book when it was free, and they were both released at the same time, and people still bought them. Probably not in the same quantity, but whatever. You don't really make much money as an author anyway, so I'm okay with that.
So are you ready to write another book?
No, not really.
Only an idiot would write a second book. The first one's much too hard. Christopher, do you have any voice left? That was a head shake, so not so much. Craig, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, just if any listeners are interested in basically some of the stuff we talked about, even just from an activist kind of perspective, you feel passionate that, hey, I don't necessarily want to hack my car, but I believe in, getting third-party components or getting like an app store kind of thing for mods. I Am the Cavalry is a great group for that, because it's not just technical people, and we need people who can speak to normal humans, whereas a lot of us engineers are really bad at that. So the more help we can get, the better off it is.
Cool. My guest has been Craig Smith, author of the Car Hacker's Handbook, founder of Open Garages, and the talent behind Thea Labs. No Starch has given us a coupon for his book. Embedded Car will get you 40% off. I think that's all caps, but you may have to try it a couple ways. If you have trouble, send me email and I'll contact them. But Embedded Car, try that at No Starch and get 40% off. Thank you so much for being here, Craig.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. It's been great.
Thank you also to Allison Chaikin for introducing us to Craig. And thank you to Christopher for producing and maybe not so much co-hosting this week, but general co-hosting. And of course, thank you for listening. Please check out our blog and newsletter. You can find it all on the embedded.fm website, along with a contact link if you'd like to say hello. We'll be here next week with something a little different. I think we're talking to our accountant about having a business in the U.S. Some of you won't like that. That's okay. I'm looking forward to it. She's got a mustache on her finger so that when she holds her finger up to her mouth, it's a mustache. So I'll be giggling the whole time. In the meantime, here's a final thought to tide you over to next week or the week before. This one is from the movie Cars. Lightning McQueen says, okay, here we go. Focus. Speed. I am speed. 1 winner, 42 losers. I eat losers for breakfast. Breakfast. Maybe I should have had breakfast. Brekkie could be good for me. No. Focus. Speed. Faster than fast. Quicker than quick. I am lightning. Embedded FM is an independently produced radio show that focuses on the many aspects of engineering. It is a production of Logical Elegance, an embedded software consulting company in California. If there are advertisements in the show, we did not put them there and do not receive any revenue from them. At this time, our sole sponsor remains Logical Elegance.